Hi guys, so if you're wondering why you have this very interesting angle for me for the first time, that's because I have a camera stand now for my phone. I also have a microphone, so if you're wondering why the audio might be just a wee bit more clear, that's why. So, Dune Messiah. I finished Dune Messiah several months ago and didn't review it because around that same time I'd also started reading around that same time I was also trying to finish Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and I finished it at the expense of not reading Dune or doing the review for Dune Messiah, because Way of Kings and the Stormlight Chronicles just took over my life. That's exactly what happened. So I've reread Dune Messiah, and now I'm doing another review, an actual review for the book. So here we go. It takes place, I can't remember exactly how many years it takes place in the future, but it takes place in the future, about 15, 20 years, give or take. Several years. It's been a while. Because, for instance, Alia is about 16, and I guess the safest way to say it, because Alia was about 3 or 4 in Dune, maybe 2. She was young. So it's been about, so now I'm thinking about it, it's been about 13 through 15 years, give or take. Alia is a very good way to figure out how much time has passed. Now, before I continue spoilers are going to abound in this review. This review is basically a book talk about Dune Messiah, because if you're going to review Dune Messiah, you might as well just talk about the damn book, because there's stuff to talk about, and there's a wealth of information out there, like in that little book. 300-page book at the most. It's a short book, a very quick read. I was able to get through it twice pretty quickly. So, yeah, gotta do what you gotta do. Anyway, so Dune Messiah, it takes place about a decade and a half, almost a decade and a half into the future. Paul is the Emperor. He is essentially the Emperor, and he doesn't like being the Emperor very much, and there are forces that don't like him being the Emperor at all, and so he has to deal with that, and that is a thing that he has to deal with. One of the interesting things about this book is the wealth of political intrigue in this book. There's more targeted political intrigue now. And the other one, it wasn't so much targeted as it was just in there. There was more philosophy and battle tactics and religious thought in the first book. And now we're in book 2, and book 2 is philosophical, but Paul is doing more. Basically more in book 2 than he had been in book 1. In book 1, he was very much somebody who let things happen to him. Good Lord, even in book 1, his sister did more than Paul did. And so there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of political marriage and political childbearing talk going on that's irritating Paul and frustrating both Chani and Irulan, and we get to know Irulan a lot more, by the way, in this book, because Irulan is the former Emperor's daughter. She has pull. She's the Bene Gesserit and Jesuit. I'm sorry. When I first read it, that's how I pronounced it, and it just keeps sticking there. But she's a Bene Gesserit, and she's not a very good one, apparently. And she is trying very hard to get an heir through Paul. Paul will not touch her. Paul touches Chani in a way to help entice Paul into using Irulan to give him the heir that Paul needs to continue his dynasty. She puts contraceptives in Chani's food. And then Chani, thinking that after she and Paul's first son, and, the first son died after all of that happened, and, she can't have, she thinks and she hasn't had any more kids since then, not for a lack of trying. She thinks that she's barren. Paul says, I've seen your children, or no, it's like, I seen your child, I know we have a child, you have another one, I know this is a thing, it is known, and then but with that being said, Chani is trying to get Paul now to sleep with Irulan, and Paul will have none of it. So there's like that political marriage, empress and concubine drama going on there, on the other hand, and Paul doesn't deal with that very well because Paul is a man and men don't deal with women problems very well, especially women political problems. Female political problems are just absolutely confusing to them, which I find hilarious, and I'm glad that Frank Herbert put that in Dune, because the fact of the matter is Paul is as great as he thinks he is until women are involved. Like, for goodness sake, like, even in the book, like, you can see him just, like, becoming increasingly frustrated with Alia, because Alia is, like, basically this virgin Reverend Mother, and also a 16-year-old girl who has hormones and urges and doesn't quite... She doesn't quite understand how to, or no, she knows how to deal with it, but she's finding out that biologics definitely overrule far more mind than she gave it credit for. So that's fun too, and that's an interesting little tidbit in the book that slowly is revealed throughout the book in regards to her and the cloned version of Duncan Idaho, who continues to have ghost memories of the father gene, if you will, of the father skin, the person that he was cloned to be. So that's interesting too. And in regards to Duncan Idaho, you also get like this kind of philosophical talk about cloning, because as in case anyone doesn't know, we have not successfully cloned a human yet. We have not. It has not happened. We haven't gotten there. And so, as we have not managed to get there yet, Frank Herbert is thinking about, okay, how do I clone humans? How does this work? How can I'm going to make a sort of prescient, atemporal ghost memory thing going on with Duncan Idaho, as Duncan not only Duncan Idaho is not only the product of the original Duncan Idaho, he was made to look, act, think, and feel a little bit like Duncan Idaho. So his brain was grown to be wired far more like Duncan Idaho than I think even the Talax. I guess it's the Talax. It's the Talaxu or the Talax. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but I'm going with Talax. And the Talax have created this being. They clearly intended it to do one thing, and I'm going to say this at the end of the book, I don't think they accomplished it. That's still ambiguous, and I think there's some, if I reread it again, I'll probably be able to come to a more concrete conclusion. I'm going to be honest, I had to reread this book again because there were things in it that I just wasn't quite sure what I read. And that's normal because it's Frank Herbert and Dune, and I had to reread passages in Dune a lot because Frank Herbert's writing style is very, I'm a white man trying to mimic Arabic storytelling. which only works so well. Because the fact of the matter is we're still white, and we grew up in a very classical, I don't know how to say, I can't remember right now how to say it. I knew it once. A very classical English storytelling lore, or not lore, but storytelling structure, and it's very A to B to C to D. This is not quite as A to B to C to D as you think it is. It has branches. Things happen. Things go off, and that definitely happened in Dune. It's kind of happening in Dune Messiah, but Dune Messiah is shorter because it's definitely a bridge between Dune and Children of Dune. And then the next one. So anyway, we have that stuff going on with Duncan, Idaho. We start getting into Irulan a little bit more. As the emperor's daughter, she's just not happy with how things work. She wants to basically be an empress, but she's not really the empress because Paul won't let her be the empress. And so you have that going on, and then you have Chani, who really wants to do right by Paul, and she thinks the best way to do right by Paul is to make sure he has an heir. When she finally gets pregnant with his heirs, plural because she has twins, but neither of them knew that at the time, she has complications during the pregnancy because Irulan fed her contraceptives, which I thought was interesting. And in today's day and age, I mean, this is how I know most feminists don't read Dune, because if feminists had read Dune, especially right now, we would be really we would hear them rage about Dune. And Dune, I have noticed, has been so far untouched by current popular culture, and I hope it stays that way, because good Lord, Frank Herbert makes a point about contraceptives. Now, I'm going to say this, contraceptives, especially back when Frank Herbert was still relatively young. I think this book was written in the 60s, maybe 70s, around that time. Contraceptives kind of sucked for us, especially. Now, I'm not saying that they don't suck for us now, because, I mean, I'll be honest, I've gone on them for the purpose of, lady issues, and they made them worse, and made me sick, and made me almost die. or more like they started the chain reaction that led to me almost getting put in the hospital of an underlying condition that I already have. And this is after consulting 3 gynecologists. So, with that being said, Frank Herbert does produce the point that contraceptives can actually be detrimental to women's health, and he shows that here with Chani, and how not only did it cause Chani to have a difficult pregnancy, but at the end of the book, she did not survive the birth, mostly because she had birth a la natural. There was no painkillers, no nothing. I'm not even entirely sure how they got the children out. Mostly because at that point, I was just kind of like, oh my god. Because at the end of the book, you're just like, oh my god. It's a great book, but you're still like, oh, I'm getting slapped in the face with all the information, and I don't know how to mitigate that. Because that's how Frank Herbert does it. He's just like, here's all the falling action at once. I'm just going to make it a tidal wave. That's how he did. So, yes. It was interesting trying to read about that. So anyway, Chani, she did not survive that very well. In fact, she died. Spoiler. I already did a spoiler thing, so I'm going to just say it. She dies at the end of the book. Her children survive, and they're very much addicted to spice, because in order to make it to where Chani ended up eating all the contraceptives, because Irulan put it in her food, or in Chani's food. Chani went on basically an all-spice diet. So she basically starved herself with spice. And then during the pregnancy, she starved herself with spice. And so that also contributed to screwing her over in the pregnancy. So not only did we have the damage that the contraceptives have already done, okay, understand she was taking contraceptives like that 100% worked over a decade basically. And then she goes on an extreme diet, not realizing that all she had to do was just stop eating the food that the cook was preparing her. And because that happened, it led to that. And granted, I think if she hadn't gone on the allspice diet, she might have probably had a better pregnancy? Maybe. But you gotta admit, the contraceptives didn't help. It was they were still in her system when she was pregnant. Like, it was still getting flushed out of her system when she was pregnant. Like, she got pregnant while the contraceptives were still in there, in her body, trying to stop her from getting pregnant. So, I mean, really, she did. It was, like, that's an interesting, like, philosophical discussion and point discussion about contraceptives in on itself, and Frank Herbert's opinion of it, and my opinion of it, and other people's opinions of it. But that, and maybe even what was going on back in the day. But that is what happened at that point. And also, I suspect Frank Herbert was making an underlying point of the dangers of extreme dieting while pregnant. So let's just, go by that. Like, there's an interesting little philosophical tidbit right there. And maybe even a discussional tidbit right there, like, from the author himself saying, this is why you probably shouldn't do this, by the way, kids. I don't know. Anyway, and that interesting, like, philosophical, it's not a philosophical rant, it's just a rant. A rant from something that I noticed that the author was doing. Anyway, let's see, we've covered all that. We basically, oh, right, there was a nuclear bomb in the book. Paul and, like, a bunch of people got blown up with a nuclear bomb, and and Paul was apparently, like, 2 blocks away, so he only got his eyes seared out of his sockets by radiation, which doesn't happen. But at the time Frank Herbert wrote the book, we didn't know enough about radiation to know that actually is not a thing that happens. So that's what happens. And at the end of the book, Paul rejects metal eyes, basically, and he continues to see with the spice, but he's also stopped taking the spice. He continues his spice intake long enough to be able to hold out long enough to completely uncover the entire ruse that everybody had put him under. And then at the end of the book, he goes out into the desert as a blind man, completely devoid of his prescient being, and it's assumed he gets eaten by a sandworm. So, I mean, not a happy book. It's a very bittersweet book, because Paul still wins, sort of, but Chani dies. Irulan is, like, pissed off. Jessica, I think, finally comes. He's kind of, I can't remember, actually, if she came at the end of the book or not. But, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and nobody really knows how to deal with it. Alia is, like, going, oh, my brother's dead, and it hurts. And it, like, it's interesting, because, like, this book is very much a feelings book, but they're, like, all stoic on the outside, but they're all feeling within. Like, they have repressed their emotions so much that it causes them to, like, be unable, like they are having their identity crises. And it's interesting. It's an interesting commentary on repressing, like, severely repressing your emotions as well. So, yeah, no, I enjoyed reading this a second time around. I've enjoyed it quite a bit, and I don't know, I may talk about it some more eventually. I give this book I'm gonna say a 4 out of 5 stars, mostly because it definitely felt like the falling action to Dune. Like, it was just tacked on in there, not quite, a little bit out of place, if you will. And so yeah, I'll give it a 4 out of 5 star rating, and I'm gonna start Children of Dune eventually. I'm working through Mists of Avalon. I will get as far as I can through Mists of Avalon, and then likely DNF it and just review it, because Mists of Avalon is like grating on my nerve. It's interesting because like I'm still reading it, but I'm reading it in the sense of I'm reading the train wreck that is before me, because it's so bad. Anyway, and what else am I reading? Oh yeah, I'm reading the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. I'm on Eye of the World. The first book, I'm slowly getting through it. I'm almost 50% of the way through, and yeah, I'm gonna get through it fairly quickly. And soon I will get to a point where I might do a part 1 review, like since she reads Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I don't know where I'm gonna do with that yet. So yeah. Good night, everybody. I hope y'all have a wonderful evening and a wonderful rest of the week. Bye.